In this video, you are going to break out some functionality currently in Server.js into a separate file, and we're also going to set up our test suite so we can verify that those utility functions are working as expected. For the moment, our goal is going to be to create a function that helps us generate this object. Instead of having to define the object every single time, we'll simply pass in two arguments to a function, the name and the text. It'll generate the object, so we don't have to do that work down below. Now, to get this done, we are going to make a separate file that we load into Server.js with a method we call instead of defining the object. Inside of the server folder, we're going to make a new directory called utils. And inside of utils, we're going to make a file called message.js. This is going to store our utility functions related to messaging. And in our case, we're going to make a new one called generate message. Let's make a variable called generate message. This is going to be a function, and it's going to take those two arguments I talked about earlier, from and text. It's then going to return an object just like the objects we pass in as the second argument to emit. Now we'll do this together, and your challenge will be the testing side of things. For now, all we need to do is return an object specifying from as the from argument up above, text as the text argument up above, and created at, that is going to get generated by calling a new date and calling its getTime method. With this in place, our utility function is now done. All we need to do is export it down below, module.exports. We're going to set that equal to an object that has a generate message property equal to the generate message variable defined above. We'll eventually be able to integrate this into Server.js, but before we do, let's go ahead and write some test cases to make sure it works as expected. This means we are going to need to install Mocha, and we're also going to need to install the expect assertion library. Then we'll set up our package.json scripts. Then we can write the test case. First up, inside of the terminal, we're going to install using npm install two modules. We need expect, which is our assertion library, at 1.20.2, and we're also going to install Mocha to run our test suite at version 3.0.2, and we're going to use the save dev flag to add these as development dependencies. Let's go ahead and run this command, and once it's done, we can move into package.json and set up those test scripts. They're going to be identical to the ones we used in the last project. Inside of package.json, we now have our two dev dependencies, and inside of scripts, we can get started by removing the old test script, and we're going to add those two scripts, test and test watch. Let's go ahead and fill out the basics first. Test, we'll set that equal to an empty string for the moment, and test-watch. The test watch script, as we know, simply calls nodemon, calling the npm test script. Nodemon --exec, then inside of single quotes npm test, that is going to get the job done. Now, when we run nodemon here, we're actually running the globally installed nodemon. We can also install it locally to fix that. To get that done, all we're going to do is run npm install nodemon. We're going to add the most recent version, which is version 1.10.2, and we are going to use the save dev flag to install it. Now, when we install nodemon like this, our application no longer relies on that global nodemon installation. So if someone else grabs this from GitHub, they're going to be able to get started without needing to install anything globally. Next up is that test script. The test script first has to set up those environment variables that we're going to be configuring. We'll do that later. For now, all we're going to do is run Mocha, passing in the pattern for the files we want to test. The files we want to test are in that server directory. They could be in any subdirectory, so we'll use ***. And the files, regardless of their name, are going to end in test.js. And with this in place, we are done. We can now run our test suite. Over in the terminal, if I run npm test, all we're going to see is that we have 0 tests in place. Here we have the server test file globbing pattern. It could not resolve any files. We can fix this issue by simply adding a test file. I'm going to add a test file for the message utility, message.test.js. Now we can go ahead and rerun the npm test command. This time around, it does indeed find a file, and we see we have 0 passing tests, which is a great starting point. Inside of here, we're going to need to add a test for the message function we just defined. Now, this test is going to verify that the object we get back is what we would expect given the parameters we passed in. We'll set up the basic structure of the test file together, and you're going to write the individual test case. First up, we need to load an expect. No way to get around that. Var expect equals require expect. This is going to let us make our assertions about the return value from our generate message function. The next thing we're going to do is add a describe block. Here we're going to add a describe block for the function generate message, and inside of the callback function, we'll have all of the test cases for that function. And before we can actually create a test case and fill it out, we do need to load in the module we're testing. I'm going to make a variable, and using ES6 destructuring, we're going to pull off generate message. Generate message. And then we can go ahead and require it using require, specifying the local path ./message. It's in the same directory as the test file where we currently are, so there's no reason to do any directory moving. With this in place, we can now add the individual test case. It should generate the correct message object, and your job is going to be to write the test case. This is going to be a synchronous test, so there is no need to provide done. All you need to do is call generate message with two values, a from value and a text value. You're going to get the response back, store response in variable, then you're going to make some assertions about the response. First up, assert that from is correct. Assert from matches the value you passed in. You're also going to assert that the text matches up. And lastly, you're going to assert that the created at value is a number. It doesn't matter what number it is. You're going to use the toBa method to check the type. Assert created at is number. Once you have all of that done, you should be able to rerun the test script over inside of the terminal, and you should see you have one test, and it is indeed passing. Now, I've left this a little open-ended because we have tested quite a few things in the past. Feel free to refer to any other videos or any other code you wrote for this course to get this challenge done. So once again, call the function, grab its return value, and assert things about that value. Pause the video, and when you're done, click play. All right, to get this done, the first thing I'm going to do is define some variables. It's fine if you went about things a different way, as long as you got the assertions working correctly. To get started, I'm going to make a from variable to store the from value. I'll go ahead and use gen. I'm also going to make a text variable to store the text value, some message. Now what I want to do is make my final variable, which is going to store the response, the message that comes back from the generate message function, which is exactly what I'm going to call right here. I'm going to call it generate message, passing in the two necessary arguments, the from argument and the text argument. I have that right here, from, comma, text. Next up, and the final thing we need to do is make assertions about this object that comes back. I am going to expect that message dot created at is a number using toBa and passing in the type number. This was the first assertion you needed to make to verify the property is correct. Next up, we're going to expect that message has certain properties inside of it. We're going to do this using the toInclude assertion, though you could have created two separate statements, one for message.from and a separate one for message.text. All of those are valid solutions. I'm just going to happen to use toInclude. And we're going to specify some things that message should include. First up, it should have a from property equal to the from variable up above. We can go ahead and use ES6 to define that, and the same thing is going to happen for text. Text should equal text, and we're going to use ES6 to set that up. We can even simplify this further. From, comma, text. Excellent. With this in place, our test case is now done, and we can go ahead and remove these commented out lines. And the final thing you needed to do was run the test suite from the terminal by running npm test. When we do it, what do we get? We get our one test under generate message, should generate correct message object, and it is indeed passing, which is fantastic. Now that we have some tests verifying our function works as expected, let's go ahead and integrate it into our application by moving into server.js and replacing all of the objects we pass to the emit function with calls to our new function. The first step in this process is going to be to import the function we just created. I'm going to do that up above by creating a constant. We'll use ES6 destructuring to grab generate message, and we're going to grab it off of a call to require. Now we're requiring a local file in a different directory. We're going to start with .. We're going to go into the utils directory since we're currently in the server directory. Then we can grab the file message by specifying it right here. Now we have access to generate message, and instead of creating these objects, we can call generate message. Right here, we're going to replace welcome to the chat app and the admin variables with arguments generate message from admin. And the text is going to be welcome to the chat app. We have the exact same functionality, but now we're using a function to generate that object for us, which is going to make scaling that out a lot easier. It's also going to make updating what is inside of a message much easier as well. Next up, we can change the one we have down below for new user joined. We're going to go ahead and replace this with the call to generate message as well. Once again, this one's from the admin, so the first argument will be the string admin. The second argument is the text new user joined. Excellent. This one is done too, and the final one is the one that actually gets sent to the user from a user, which means we have message.from and message.text. Those are going to be our arguments. We're going to call generate message with those two, message.from, and as the second argument, message.text. And with this in place, we are done. The last thing left to do for this video is test that this is working as expected. I'm going to start up the server using node-mon without a space between node and mon. Server/server.js. Once the server is up, we can go ahead and test things out by opening up a couple of tabs with the developer tools open. For the first tab, I'm going to visit localhost 3000. Inside of the console, we should see our new message printing. The object looks the same even though it's now generated by the function, and we can test that everything else is working as expected too by opening up a second tab and opening up its developer tools. And this time around, the first tab should see a new message. Here we have a new user joined. That's still working. And if we emit a custom message from this second tab, it should show up in the first. I'm going to use the up arrow key to run one of our previous create message event emitters. I'm going to fire off the function, and if I go to the first tab, we do indeed get the message, which is fantastic. This should work, prints in the first tab, and it also prints in the second since we're calling io.emit as opposed to the broadcast method. Now that everything is working, we are done. We can make a commit and wrap this one up. I'm going to call get status from the terminal. Here we have new files as well as modified ones, which means we're going to want to call get add dot. Next up, we can call get commit with a message flag, create, generate message utility. Excellent. I'm going to push this up to GitHub, and that is it for this one. In the next one, we're going to take a look at Socket.io acknowledgements, which are fantastic. It's coming up next, so stay tuned. I'll see you then.